The courtroom reeked of bleach and boredom. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead like dying stars. A tired bailiff called the next case with robotic disinterest: State versus Jalen Reese. No one in the gallery paid much attention. Another day. Another name. Another absurd sentencing in Municipal District Court Number 92. Jalen walked in wearing a school uniform, his tie crooked but his posture unshaken. 16, lean, steady-eyed, black. He held no paper, no legal aid, just silence. The prosecution presented a printout showing Jalen was caught standing on the wrong street corner during Code Orange, a curfew protocol initiated due to neighborhood instability. No weapon. No contraband. Just a hoodie and bad timing. The defense? A public defender who arrived 20 minutes late, chewing gum. Your Honor, she mumbled, the defendant has no record, maintains a 4.0 GPA, and was heading home from chess club. I respectfully request probation and community service. Judge Barlow's expression never changed. Thick jowls, yellowed fingernails tapping impatiently on his elevated bench. 4.0 GPA, he mocked. Must be a genius if he can't follow basic laws. Hoodie during Code Orange? Might as well wear a sign that says, "Arrest me." He turned a page in the case file with a scoff, not even pretending to read it. Maximum sentence. Gasps didn't echo. People had learned not to react. Life in prison. Without parole. For violating curfew and wearing intimidating apparel. That's what the sentence read. The bailiff grabbed Jalen's arm, but the boy didn't resist. He simply pulled a small flip phone from his pocket. Old tech. A relic. One number dialed. One ring. Then a calm voice. Hey Dad, it happened. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the faint hum of the courthouse AC unit. Then everything started to move again. The phone was confiscated. He was handcuffed. The public defender sighed and walked away like a waitress clocking out. Jalen, still composed, offered no protest. The judge, frowning now, asked, "Who the hell was he calling?" No answer came. Inside the courthouse basement, where detainees were temporarily held, 2 guards played poker with a deck missing 5 cards. They barely looked up when Jalen was brought in. "Another hoodie hero," one muttered. "Bet he thinks somebody's coming for him." Jalen sat on the cold bench, back straight. Not afraid. Not broken. Just waiting. In the judge's chambers upstairs, Barlow slumped in his leather chair, swirling a glass of soda and whiskey. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He ignored it. Buzzed again. Still ignored. The third time, it rang. A different ringtone, one reserved for federal priority lines. He answered. "This is Judge Barlow." "Hang up, and you'll be impeached by dawn," said the voice. Calm. Commanding. Controlled. "I am invoking emergency judicial oversight under Order 77A. "On whose authority?" Barlow barked. The voice replied, "Mine." And that's when Judge Barlow realized the last name of the boy he'd sentenced wasn't just coincidence. Reese. As in Anthony Reese, U.S. Attorney General, the highest lawman in the nation. Barlow began sweating. His chair squeaked beneath him. He broke the law. The law, said the voice, was written to break people like him. Jalen sat in the holding cell as officers paced. He wasn't shackled. They didn't dare now. A lieutenant had just whispered to the captain, "This kid's dad is someone important." But Jalen didn't seem interested in flexing any power. He simply stared ahead, silent. Across the country, inside a glass-walled room in Washington, D.C., AG Anthony Reese stood in front of a table of advisors. His suit jacket off, sleeves rolled. "We have a problem," he said. "And I want the nation to see it." They began pulling files. Statistics. Video footage. Other youth sentenced by Judge Barlow. Disproportionately black, Latinx, underprivileged. Sentences handed down for minor infractions. Skipping school, vaping, talking back. The team assembled a dossier within minute. "This is not a judicial mistake," Reese said. "This is a pattern. A machine. And today, it tried to swallow my son. He didn't speak with fury. He spoke with focus. Calculated urgency. In courtrooms like Barlow's, absurd laws were weapons. Jalen's sentencing wasn't rare. It was routine. The only difference now was spotlight. And that made Barlow nervous. Because the moment he learned who the father was, every smug quip, every arbitrary gavel slam, rewound in his mind with new gravity. Downstairs, an officer brought Jalen water. "You okay, kid?" Jalen nodded. "I've been okay. It's the system that's not." Outside the courthouse, a lone protester appeared, holding a handwritten sign, "A hoodie isn't a crime." A reporter filmed it. Within an hour, that video hit 1,000 retweets. By midnight, it was trending nationwide. By dawn, Judge Barlow's name would be in every headline, not as a protector of law, but as a symbol of its mockery. But none of that mattered yet. Not to Jalen. Not in that cell. He simply whispered to himself, "They always told me the law was blind. But maybe it's just been pretending not to see." The phone call traveled through secure lines, bypassing firewalls, satellites, and surveillance checkpoints before landing on a private channel labeled Alpha Contact. Inside a high-rise office in Washington, D.C., U.S. Attorney General Anthony Reese paused mid-briefing, his smartwatch vibrating softly. He stepped away, answered, and heard his son's voice, calm, composed, and heartbreakingly familiar. "Hey, Dad, it happened." Silence. Anthony didn't ask what. He knew. The breath he exhaled sounded like steel bending. "Where are you?" he asked. Jalen named the courthouse. Anthony's voice shifted into authority. "I'll handle it." Back in the boardroom, his staff fell silent when he returned. "Protocol Black Echo," he said. "Initiate it now." Confusion swept the room. That protocol had never been activated. It existed only for direct interference of due process involving a member of the AG's family under unconstitutional jurisdiction. His deputy asked, "Sir, what's happening?" Anthony looked at them with fire in his eyes. "My son just got sentenced to life in prison for existing." He barked orders. DOJ contacts lit up. Civil rights attorneys were called. A federal intervention task force was mobilized. They weren't just going to challenge the verdict. They were going to torch the system that allowed it. In a dusty archive room below the courthouse, a technician pulled microdata on Judge Barlow's rulings. Over 100 lifetime sentences in the last 5 years. More than 90% were underage males of color. Most for non-violent offenses. Anthony scanned the data remotely. "He built a prison empire out of children," he muttered. Meanwhile, in his holding cell, Jalen refused the food tray but accepted the book someone left behind, Letters from Birmingham Jail. He read slowly, each word echoing across generations. "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." He whispered it aloud like a prayer. In D.C., AG Reese's crisis team ran simulations. Local law provided sovereignty loopholes allowing Barlow near total control in his courtroom. The DOJ couldn't directly overturn the ruling yet. But a clause in Federal Oversight Order 77A allowed immediate intervention if a sentencing could be proven to violate constitutional norms on its face. The sentence wasn't just harsh. It was absurd. They had a case, but they had to move fast. Anthony called the president personally. No assistants, no security filters. Just one man to another. "I need temporary emergency jurisdiction. This isn't just about my son, it's about national credibility." The president listened, nodded. "You're cleared. But be careful. This sets precedent." Anthony replied, "Good. That's exactly what I intend to do." Inside the courthouse, news hadn't reached everyone yet. The staff joked about Jalen's important phone call, thinking it a bluff. But the bailiff noticed something different. Federal suits arriving, quiet and urgent. Something was coming. Back in his private office, Barlow poured another drink, hands slightly trembling. The call earlier had unsettled him more than he let on. He'd been in power too long, had sentenced too many kids with the same casual disdain. But this one had a father who could fight back. Still, he believed in the shield of jurisdiction. "They can't touch me," he whispered. "This is my court." What he hadn't calculated was how deeply the public cared when injustice had a name, a face, and a father in power. On social media, Jalen's school ID photo circulated with a caption, 4.0 GPA. Chess club. Life sentence. The outrage spread like lightning. Within hours, national outlets picked it up. CNN, MSNBC. Even conservative talk shows couldn't ignore it. The public wasn't divided. They were united in disbelief. Commentators asked, "If the Attorney General's son isn't safe from this madness, who is?" In his cell, Jalen turned another page. He wasn't worried. Not because his father was powerful, but because the country had finally seen what kids like him endured every day. His mother once told him, "You were born to endure, but not to be silent." He didn't plan on being silent now. Back in D.C., Anthony recorded a short, direct video. "My son, Jalen Reese, has just been sentenced to life in prison for violating an arbitrary curfew while walking home from chess club. I am speaking not just as a father, but as the Attorney General of the United States. This case is a moral and constitutional crisis, and we will not let it stand." The clip went viral. Every agency suddenly moved. Lawyers, civil rights groups, retired judges, whistleblowers. The DOJ switchboards jammed. Senators called emergency hearings. In the face of bureaucratic absurdity, people wanted truth. They wanted someone to lead. Anthony didn't campaign. He activated. And the country followed. Meanwhile, Barlow made a crucial mistake. He gave a smug local interview. "He may be the Attorney General's son, but in my courtroom, he's just another thug." The clip leaked. The backlash was immediate. Sponsors pulled funding from the local justice district. Civil rights organizations called for his resignation. The governor was flooded with calls. Barlow's immunity was no longer political armor. It was political cancer. Inside that pressure cooker, systems started to crack. Lawyers began filing appeals. Old cases resurfaced. Clerks spoke out. Jalen didn't know all the details. He didn't need to. He felt the shift in the air. One guard said quietly, "You're not gonna be here long, kid." Jalen looked up from his book and said, "None of us should have been here to begin with." Outside, cameras were now permanently fixed on the courthouse. Protesters marched with signs quoting his school essays. Old classmates showed up in uniforms, standing in silent support. The country had its villain. But more importantly, it had a symbol. Not of victimhood, of resistance. This wasn't just about a call. It was about a system finally being forced to listen. And it all began with a sentence so absurd, no one could pretend it was justice anymore. And with a son who didn't scream, didn't panic. He just called his father. Not to beg. Not to cry. Just to say, "It happened." And trust the man who raised him to do the rest. The White House Situation Room was unusually tense for a domestic case. The file on Judge Barlow had reached the president's desk, and every page painted a damning portrait. A judge with unchecked power, operating under a dystopian veil of local sovereignty, had become a national liability overnight. The president's directive was short: make it right or make it gone. Attorney General Anthony Reese took the lead. He wasn't acting as a father anymore. He was acting as the highest legal authority in the country. He ordered the DOJ to coordinate with the Federal Oversight Committee. "I want every record from Municipal District Court Number 92. Every sentencing. Every sealed report. No more red tape. We go in hard." Digital forensics analysts discovered deeply buried anomalies. Hundreds of minor infractions reclassified as felonies to meet the minimum requirement for maximum sentencing. A hidden quota system emerged. Emails between the judge and a for-profit detention corporation confirmed backdoor incentives. More inmates meant more funding. Most of the defendants were minors, mostly black and Latino. No due process. No oversight. Just numbers in a machine. The revelation sent shockwaves through federal ranks. "This is bigger than one sentence," Reese said. "This is engineered oppression, wearing a robe." State officials tried to stall, citing jurisdictional codes meant to protect judicial independence. But Reese countered with federal emergency oversight, a rarely used clause designed for systemic rights violations. He issued a direct subpoena to Judge Barlow and the local DA. The media received a statement. "The Department of Justice will not allow the Constitution to be mutilated by personal prejudice and political laziness." The response was explosive. Civil rights leaders praised the action. Opposition media fumbled between defending Barlow and distancing from his corruption. The public wasn't split. There was no moral ambiguity in a teenager sentenced to life for walking home. Barlow refused to acknowledge the subpoena. Instead, he held a press conference on the steps of his courthouse, flanked by loyalists and echoing phrases like law and order, judicial integrity, and outside interference. He claimed the Attorney General was weaponizing fatherhood to dismantle American values. But it backfired. Clips from the press conference circulated online, next to footage of crying mothers whose children had disappeared into Barlow's legal system. Former inmates shared horror stories of being sentenced for gum chewing, hallway loitering, or speaking slang. Their faces became the counter-narrative to Barlow's scripted lies. The tide turned rapidly. Congressional leaders, including those once skeptical of DOJ intervention, voiced support for full investigation. Legal scholars wrote op-eds calling Barlow's system a domestic Guantanamo for teenagers. A whistleblower inside the courthouse came forward, revealing judges were coached to maximize sentencing during election years to appear tough on crime. Meanwhile, Anthony Reese expanded the scope. He called for a full audit of sentencing records across similar districts nationwide. The message was clear. Barlow wasn't a rogue actor. He was a symptom. The DOJ was treating the disease. In private, Anthony wrestled with a complex emotion. His son was the reason all of this had come to light, but Jalen never wanted to be a symbol. He'd once said during a dinner conversation, "Justice should work even when no one's watching." That phrase now appeared on placards carried by thousands protesting across the country. Back at the courthouse, panic set in. Court clerks shredded documents. Staffers resigned. The local mayor issued a public apology, claiming ignorance. Internal communications revealed local leaders had received federal funds for crime reduction programs, then funneled that money into partnerships with private detention centers. In one message, a city councilman bragged about turning lost boys into budget bonuses. The leak of that message incinerated the last of Barlow's defenses. Public demand soared for Barlow's removal. Online petitions passed 2 million signatures. School principals from surrounding counties issued joint statements condemning the court's role in targeting students. A teacher who taught Jalen in 5th grade went viral for recounting how he once solved a statewide math challenge blindfolded. Federal marshals were dispatched under sealed orders. It was no longer a question of if Barlow would face consequences. It was how soon and how publicly. Behind the scenes, Reese coordinated with the National Judicial Review Board. A temporary federal panel was approved to oversee cases previously ruled under Barlow's jurisdiction. The implications were seismic. Hundreds of wrongly convicted teens might be eligible for immediate release. It became clear. The sentence against Jalen had cracked open an entire system designed to trap young people, especially those who looked like him. Reese addressed the nation once more. "We are not only correcting a verdict, we are dismantling an architecture of cruelty built under the banner of law." Cable news replayed it for days. Political anchors debated its weight. Youth-led groups launched a campaign titled, "Not Just Jalen," spotlighting other stories from victims of similar sentencing. In the chaos, Judge Barlow's isolation grew. Allies disappeared. Phone calls stopped. Legal protection evaporated. The system he built had finally turned on him. But none of this stopped Jalen's appeal from progressing. A federal review date was set. Within 48 hours, the DOJ would present their case before an emergency judicial tribunal. The public was ready. The country was watching. And for once, the system wasn't shielding itself. It was cracking open for the world to see. Not because of a riot, not because of violence, but because one teenager called his father. And that father refused to let a broken system silence the truth. The first news anchor to utter Jalen's name hesitated, unsure how to frame a story so egregious it felt unreal. A black teenager, honor student, no priors, sentenced to life in prison for walking home during a curfew hour while wearing a hoodie. The reaction online was immediate. Within hours, the story went viral. Not because of his father's position, but because every part of it screamed something was rotten far beyond one courtroom. A clip from Jalen's 8th grade graduation resurfaced. He stood proudly reciting the preamble to the Constitution with flawless precision. Establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. The irony cut deep. That video, juxtaposed with his mugshot, became the image of a country's conscience cracking. Major outlets picked it up, then influencers, celebrities, athletes. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag justice for Jalen. Hashtag system on trial. But the one that gained the most traction was simple. Hashtag Your Honor, he's my problem now. People weren't just outraged, they were united. For once, the debate wasn't split down political lines. It was a moral instinct. The public didn't need details. They needed justice. Local protests emerged outside the courthouse, then in Chicago, then Atlanta, then Seattle. High school students staged walkouts. College campuses lit candles. Even corporate offices sent memos acknowledging the growing unrest. The story wasn't about Jalen anymore. It was about every kid who disappeared into the cracks of a system no one questioned until now. News anchors stopped speaking in neutral tones. They used words like grotesque, inhumane, and undeniably racist. Former judges began speaking out. A retired Supreme Court justice called it a grotesque parody of jurisprudence. Meanwhile, Jalen remained in the detention facility. But his face was now a national symbol. A mural of him was painted overnight in downtown Philadelphia. His face half-shadowed, half-illuminated, captioned, "See me now." Celebrities posted messages. A well-known actor said, "If this was my son, I'd burn that courthouse down." But Jalen's dad is showing us a better way. More stories poured in. Parents of other kids sentenced under Judge Barlow came forward. One mother sobbed on live TV, recounting how her son was given 10 years for drawing graffiti on an abandoned bus. A father revealed his daughter was expelled, arrested, and sentenced over a vaping violation. Suddenly, the media had a pattern, and America had receipt. The court that once handed out life sentences like candy now found itself under a microscope. The judge's own words were played back in a damning montage, mocking defendants, dismissing evidence, joking during sentencing. Public trust in that district's judicial integrity plummeted to near zero. State representatives called for a recall. Editorial boards demanded oversight. But the most powerful shift came not from rage, but from resolve. Jalen's calm demeanor during his arrest, no screams, no panic, became a quiet kind of bravery people respected. Advocacy groups began fundraising for the families affected. Civil liberties organizations launched rapid response legal teams. Volunteer lawyers began reviewing cases ruled under Judge Barlow, marking dozens for emergency appeals. One student-created app let users read summarized versions of Barlow's rulings. Its name, Judged. In 2 days, it had over 1 million downloads. The cultural shift didn't stop at protest. It pushed into policy. Governors of multiple states announced reviews of their juvenile justice practices. School boards distanced themselves from courts that issued discipline-based arrests. Something was unraveling, but something else was being born. A recognition that the law must not just be enforced, it must be questioned. Meanwhile, behind bars, Jalen received a letter a guard slipped to him. It was from a 12-year-old boy named Marcus. "I saw you on the news. You make me feel like maybe it's okay to be smart and black and still be brave." That letter meant more than 1,000 headlines, because it wasn't written in protest. It was written in hope. Jalen wrote back, "Marcus, it's not just okay. It's necessary." That short reply, shared online by Marcus's family, went viral. Now Jalen wasn't just a headline. He was a leader, without speeches, without a microphone, just quiet clarity in a moment when everything else was noise. And yet, this clarity only magnified the shame of what had been done. Petitions to remove Judge Barlow passed 3 million signatures. Activists renamed the square outside the courthouse Jalen's Corner. A documentary crew requested permission to chronicle the trial, but Reese declined all interview requests. He issued one statement: "We are not here for attention. We are here to fix what's been broken, and to make sure it never breaks this way again." The media latched onto those words. Fix what's broken. The phrase became the unofficial slogan of the movement. And for the first time in a long time, the country didn't just want answers. It wanted to heal. And it all started with one sentence, one phone call, and one kid who refused to break. Judge Barlow sat in his chambers, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling as he scrolled through articles calling him the face of judicial corruption. His name was being spoken with venom, not reverence. He had spent decades cloaked in power, protected by obscurity and a warped system that applauded his severity. But now there were no calls of support, no allies defending him, no statements from the Bar Association buffering the fall. He wasn't under fire. He was already burning. The DOJ task force had officially launched a formal misconduct inquiry. Former court employees gave sworn statements about falsified dockets, ignored evidence, and a policy of pushing for maximum penalties to boost courthouse funding. A former clerk admitted Barlow once said, "A long sentence makes the news, a light one gets forgotten." Subpoenas landed on the desks of county officials. Private prison executives began lawyering up. Judges from neighboring districts released statements distancing themselves. Barlow issued a press release claiming he was a target of federal overreach, but it fell flat. No one was listening, because in the days since Jalen's sentencing, over 50 more cases had surfaced, each bearing the same hallmarks: minor infraction, non-white defendant, disproportionate sentence, no legal defense. One 17-year-old girl had been sentenced to 8 years for skipping detention. She was now suicidal. Another boy had been arrested at a school assembly for wearing a banned wristband. He hadn't seen his mother in 9 months. The country wasn't just shocked, it was ashamed. And Barlow had no room left to hide. Inside the Federal Bureau of Judicial Oversight, the evidence was being catalogued for public hearing. Recordings of Barlow laughing during sentencing played like damning exhibits in a future trial. His voice, smug and detached, declaring lives disposable, now echoed through national broadcasts. Attorney General Reese stood over a table lined with files, photos, handwritten letters. He wasn't just fighting for his son now. He was dismantling a machine. His office began preparing what no attorney general had ever attempted, charging a sitting judge under RICO statutes, not just for corruption, but for criminal conspiracy to defraud civil rights. Meanwhile, Jalen's face remained the story's emotional core. But it wasn't pity that fueled public outrage, it was recognition. America saw itself in Jalen. Bright, capable, misunderstood, and punished for existing. Schools began hosting forums. Teachers read from Jalen's school essays. A university offered him a full scholarship in a public statement. Still incarcerated, Jalen's influence was reshaping the country's understanding of what justice was supposed to be. Reese refused to let the momentum fade. He directed his legal teams to review every child sentenced under Barlow's bench in the past 15 years. That number surpassed 700. Each one now under review. Barlow, backed into a legal and moral corner, finally broke. He granted his first interview, but it wasn't an apology. It was bitterness disguised as bravado. They think I'm a villain because I upheld the law. No one cries for the victims of the kids I locked up. But there were no victims. Not in Jalen's case. Not in most of them. The crimes were invented, exaggerated, misinterpreted. The only real injury was to the Constitution. The interview backfired. Victims' families rallied. Civil rights leaders spoke louder. An anonymous jurist leaked internal memos from Barlow's office advising prosecutors to use psychological profiling and clothing choices as indicators of threat level. Hoodies, slang, eye contact, all marked as escalation factors. The courtroom wasn't a place of judgment. It was a trap. Congress called for an emergency hearing on juvenile justice. Jalen's name was mentioned 18 times in the first 20 minutes. The movement was no longer reactive. It was legislative. A draft bill emerged within days, the Reese Juvenile Protection Act. It included mandatory counsel for minors, sentence cap limits, and an independent judicial review board to investigate any ruling exceeding national norms. Barlow watched this unfold on a dusty screen in his now empty office. The chair beside his bench had been removed. The nameplate on his door had been taken down. Even the janitor wouldn't make eye contact. The DOJ issued a final ultimatum: appear for a federal inquiry or be detained. Barlow didn't respond. But his silence only confirmed his guilt. He was arrested without spectacle. No cameras, no protest. Just a silent descent into the very system he abused. In that moment, the country saw something it rarely witnessed: accountability from above. Not vengeance. Not revenge. Just the machinery of justice, finally realigned. The judge who had sentenced hundreds of children with cruelty now faced the full weight of the laws he once twisted. And behind it all, the sun he tried to break remained steady. Not bitter. Not loud. Just unshakable. And that quiet strength, magnified by a nation's awakening, proved more powerful than any gavel ever slammed. The courtroom felt different now. Not because of its layout or the polished wooden benches, but because of who was watching. This wasn't just about one boy anymore. It was about all the ones before him who didn't have a voice loud enough to escape. It was about a nation staring its reflection in the face. And for the first time, the mirror didn't lie. Jalen sat calmly across from the tribunal bench, shackles removed, no guards flanking him. He wasn't here as a defendant anymore. He was the reason this hearing existed. Federal oversight had taken control of the court for one day only. The people now had the floor, and justice had no script. Attorney General Anthony Reese stepped forward, but he didn't speak first. That right had been given to Jalen. A choice he made, not for theatrics, but because this was his story. His voice didn't shake. He looked the panel in the eye. "This isn't about revenge," he began. "I'm not here to embarrass a man who tried to disappear me. I'm here because a system tried to make me invisible, and it almost succeeded." Every word hit with quiet force. "I know kids who didn't make it. Kids who were labeled dangerous because they raised their voices or wore the wrong shoes. Who were locked away because a court needed funding or a judge needed applause. I read about them when I was inside. I remembered their names. I remember mine." He stopped, let the silence stretch, then added, "And I'm not special. I just had someone pick up the phone." The room sat with it. No applause. No commentary. Just truth, settled like dust. Reese stepped in next. He didn't pace. He didn't pontificate. He presented. "Your Honors, we've collected over 700 juvenile cases under Judge Barlow's tenure that violated constitutional standard. This tribunal has seen them. You've seen the sentencing records, the patterns, the racial targeting, the manipulation of legal definitions to escalate charges, the failure to provide adequate counsel, the abuse of judicial discretion. We are not arguing theory. We are documenting history." He paused only to breathe, then continued. "And if this case were isolated, we would handle it as such. But it is not. This case is systemic. This court was a pipeline. And this boy was almost another number." He ended with no dramatics, no pounding fists, just the final line. "You don't fix a broken system by putting a bandage over the wound. You fix it by removing the infection." Across the room, the now disgraced Judge Barlow was escorted in. His face was pale, hair disheveled, demeanor empty. He wasn't in control anymore. No robe, no bench, no gavel. Just a defendant in denial. He was asked if he had anything to say. He looked at Jalen. Not with remorse. With disbelief. "I did what I was allowed to do," he said flatly. "The law let me. The state backed me. The people elected me. If they didn't want those sentences, they should have changed the statutes." He offered no apology. Just justification. One panel member asked him, "And did you ever, in those 700 cases, ask yourself if you were doing what was right?" Barlow shrugged. "It wasn't my job to feel. It was my job to decide." His words were written down. Not as evidence but as legacy. The panel recessed. Not for long. Their verdict had been forming long before this hearing began. Barlow was found guilty of willful judicial misconduct, systemic civil rights violations, and conspiracy to abuse discretionary power for financial and political gain. Disbarred. Sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole. He left the courtroom without another word. The silence that followed wasn't for him. It was for what came next. The panel turned to Jalen. "You have the right to request reparative damages, expungement, and federal witness protection," one member said. Jalen shook his head. "I don't need protection. I need purpose." He asked instead for 3 things. First, that every juvenile sentenced under Barlow's court be automatically reviewed and, if necessary, retried with federal oversight. Second, that funding be diverted from regional detention facilities into education and mental health programs. And third, that the transcripts of this tribunal be sent to every public high school in the country. Not to shame the system. To educate it. The request was granted. Unanimously. And just like that, a boy once sentenced to life became the reason hundreds of lives might begin again. Outside, reporters waited for a statement. Jalen exited quietly, walked straight past the cameras. His father caught up to him. "You know," Reese said, "you could have just said thank you." Jalen smiled. "You taught me better than that." That night, while the country digested what had happened, Jalen went home for the first time in weeks. No speeches. No parades. Just his room, a book, and the feeling of air not filtered through prison vent. And somewhere across the country, a dozen kids facing unjust hearings woke up to the news that maybe, just maybe, someone had cracked the glass ceiling of injustice. Not by force, but by truth. The headlines faded. The noise dimmed. The protests dissolved into new causes, new fights. But something had shifted, not just in policy, not just in courtrooms, but in people. What had started with one boy and one call had become a seed. And now, quietly, it began to grow. Jalen didn't return to the life he had before. That life had been interrupted in a way that couldn't be undone. There was no simple return to chess club or walking home after school. Instead, he enrolled in a legal education mentorship program, not as a student but as an advisor. The very institutions that once failed him now asked for his guidance. And he gave it, not out of pride but responsibility. In every session, every workshop, every online panel, Jalen spoke in the same way he had in court, clear, humble, direct. He wasn't interested in becoming a celebrity or a symbol. He wanted result. Systems didn't change through emotion alone, they changed through structure. So, he helped design one. Within 3 months, a new legal initiative launched nationwide, the Youth Accountability and Restoration Network, YERN, named deliberately to evoke the idea of untangling injustice one thread at a time. Its mission: identify, review, and correct juvenile court injustices across all 50 states. Jalen insisted it be nonpartisan, grassroots-led, and youth-informed. He wanted the kids themselves involved in the solutions. He visited juvenile centers not as an official or a guest of honor, but as someone who'd worn the same uniform, seen the same walls, and survived the same silence. They listened to him, not because of what had happened to him, but because he didn't talk down to them. He spoke with them. "I don't know your story," he'd often begin, "but I know what it feels like when your voice doesn't count." Then he'd listen. No judgment, just space. For many, it was the first time anyone had ever made room for their words. Meanwhile, Attorney General Reese continued dismantling the remnants of Judge Barlow's machine. More judges were investigated. Entire court districts underwent audit. Transparency laws were passed requiring real-time public access to juvenile sentencing data. What once hid in plain sight was now forced into the light. The Reese Juvenile Protection Act passed Congress with unexpected bipartisan support. It mandated legal representation for all minors, eliminated for-profit detention contracts for youth facilities, and created a National Review Board for sentencing disparities. It became one of the most sweeping justice reforms in the country's history. And yet, it was Jalen's story, not his father's power, that made the impact permanent. Universities began using the transcript of his tribunal testimony as teaching material. High schools turned his quotes into discussion topic. "Justice isn't about mercy, it's about fairness," he had said. "Mercy is a favor. Fairness is a right." When he received an honorary degree from a law school that once wouldn't have admitted him based on his zip code, he accepted it only on one condition: that the ceremony include 10 kids currently on probation, each paired with a mentor from the graduating class. The school agreed. That night, 10 futures shifted course. Jalen refused book deals, refused documentaries, but he agreed to one thing: a curriculum. Developed with former educators and social workers, it taught kids how the legal system works, how to assert their rights, and how to advocate for themselves and others. It was introduced in classrooms under the title, "Stand Up, Speak Wise." Some said he was too young to lead. Others called him lucky. But those closest to him knew he wasn't moved by praise or position. He was moved by memory. He still kept the letter from Marcus, the 12-year-old who wrote to him from a quiet corner of the country, saying he finally felt seen. That letter was framed on his desk, next to a worn copy of letters from Birmingham jail. Both reminders of how words, when spoken clearly and truthfully, could reshape even the most rigid structures. The media stopped reporting on him daily. The spotlight drifted. But the work didn't stop. Jalen's presence remained in policies passed, in schools reformed, in courtrooms remodeled, in laws rewritten. He didn't just break through the system. He built something in its place. Years later, a child would read about his case in a civics textbook and ask their teacher, "How did this happen?" And the answer wouldn't be shame. It would be resilience. It would be about a young black boy who didn't scream when the world turned on him, didn't curse the system that tried to erase him, didn't run from the weight of his moment. He just picked up the phone. And by doing so, he reminded a country of what justice was supposed to be. Not perfect, but possible.